Easy now, Donna.
Well, good afternoon. I think we're ready to get started. If everyone would like to go ahead and have a seat, and we do have additional seating on the other side of this middle bookcase here. Just kind of settle in. Again, thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you helping us celebrate and recognize Iola Register for its 150 years. I'm Bruce Symes. I'm the Writing Center Coordinator here and Journalism Instructor at Allen. And I would like to introduce our special guests today. First of all is Susan Lynn, Editor and Publisher of the Register. And we're really honored to have Doug Anstead from the Kansas Press Association. And our college president, John Masterson. Right off the bat, also, I'd like to thank our library director, Sandy Moore, and her assistant, Virginia Schaefer, for making the space available, providing refreshments, and just being gracious hosts. Also to Nancy Ford for helping us promote today, and of course the maintenance staff for setting up and taking down. Nothing happens around here without them. So, another person. John, our president, has been very instrumental in getting today together and helping planning some events. So I'm going to ask him to get us started with some remarks.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you for all of your help in putting this thing together. Sandy and Bruce did all the heavy lifting, and I've just got to be right along for the come along for the ride. Thank you so much all for turning out. I'm thrilled to see some of our students here. I think some of the things you're going to hear today are very, very important in light of our news agencies and some of the things being said and the traditions that have come forward into Kansas news. So we're thrilled to have you here. And new and old friends, trustees and staff, it's just it's great to have this kind of an outing to celebrate 150 years. Now, contrary to some of my employees and students, I was not here at the beginning. But actually, I was thinking I've been here almost half, so I guess I could speak about this. I've got fond memories of the Iola Register going back as far as I can remember. I can remember my mother helping me learn to read by reading articles that she thought that I might find interesting too, which was usually in the comic page for sports. But it goes back that far. And when I thought about that, not only from the standpoint of what that paper meant to me from an intellectual standpoint, it also was my first job. I can remember sitting, and I wasn't very old, I had a 24-inch bicycle, which if you had one of those paper bags, you had to really notch it up to get it so it didn't drag you around. But I was sitting with my mother, and most of you who knew her, she was okay, I guarantee you. But I was sitting out on the front porch with her, and I said, "Mom, I'm bored." And she said, "Well, why don't you get up off your butt and go find a job then?" I said, well, I'm just a little kid, where am I going to work? And she said, "Go down to the Register." She said, "I bet they're looking for paper boys down there." And so I got on my little 24-incher, drove down there and had a job that day, which I don't think I've not had one since then, too. So looks like she could have taken me to the park or something. But, I look back on that, and I just think how much I learned from that very first job. I learned responsibility that every day, whether it was nasty out or pretty out, and all your buddies were going to go play ball or whatever, you had papers to deliver. Then you could do something. Saturday morning, you got up and you delivered your papers. Then you had the day off. And it just became, that was the way life is, and it's kind of stuck with me. I learned about customer service. I learned how important it was to get that paper on the porch because some of my customers would remind me if I didn't. And they were much nicer at Christmas time, and you learned a little bit about human nature. I can remember we did our own collections at that time. It was pretty heavy. It was $1.25 a month, and so some of those folks would greet you at the porch and maybe even have a dime tip for you or something. Others would absolutely avoid you until you ran them down and got that $1.25, and that lesson has stuck with me as well. Supervision of employees. You know, once your route got big enough, then you could get a sub. And I can remember 2 or 3 young people that I felt so good about getting started in the business, you know, and being a part of that. But I think most of all was that sense of accomplishment and the reward, cash money, that you had, that you could spend or you could save or you could do whatever with. But I just look back at that, and some of those lessons, you know, you took to the next job and the next job and the next job, and you still have them today. So for that aspect of the Iola Register, I am truly, truly thankful. As a college president, I so respect and appreciate our newspaper. The newspaper helps us get the word out about the college and the good things that are going on out here, our events and our board meetings and what's taking place there. But it's so much more than that. It's our cheerleader. It's the one pillar that focuses on the good things that are happening in Iowa, Kansas, and we feel like we're part of that. It also serves as a watchdog. And what I've always said in my relationship with the reporters in the Register, I've always appreciated the fact I don't think they're snooping for bad news, but they're not going to avoid it either. And if I'm doing something that is bad at the college, I would expect it to be on the front page of our Iola Register. So it's been such an important part of our community and what's going on, and an important part of the college. Because of the Register's contribution, and which is part of the reason that we wanted to be a part of this. We feel like that the Register is important to our community, important to our college, and Susan and the folks in her family have had such a long tradition of providing the news and the publicity. Our Board of Trustees at last month's board meeting voted to produce a certificate that I'd like to get right now. Susan, I'd like to read this. This is a certificate of appreciation presented by Allen Community College to the Iola Register for 150 years of keeping Allen County and the surrounding area informed about matters of importance, providing a forum of public discourse about current events, and promoting the betterment of our citizens. Given this 27th day of September 2017, and signed by John Masterson and Ken McGuffin, our board chair.
Thank you very much, John. I came to the college about 9 years ago after working with the newspaper for a lot of years, and I was hired by and got to work for Emerson Lynn Jr., Susan's dad, and am privileged to say that he was my mentor. He taught me what I know about community journalism, and really John touched on it. First of all, we are the cheerleader for the community. We live here. You guys are our neighbors. We go to the churches and the basketball games and shop at the businesses. So, and the prosperity of the community means the prosperity of the newspaper. So we really should be rooting for the community. At the same time, we are the eyes and ears of the public as journalists. So when there are disappointing stories or embarrassing stories or tragic stories that we have to report, we have that responsibility as well. And it's a balance, it's a tenuous balance at times, but I was able to learn a little bit about that from him. Susan came 6 years before I left the paper to come to the college, and I got to work with her, and I know from that experience that she also feels that way about community journalism, the role of journalism in a small town like this, and really grateful for that. So that's my take on community journalism. Now you guys are going to learn what it really means from the president of the Kansas Press Association, Doug Anstadt.
I was about to say that they were stealing all my thunder, but because frankly, the newspaper that you had in Iola was absolutely the epitome of what we consider to be a community newspaper and the practice of community journalism. It's my honor to be here today. Emerson served with me as a publisher and at the Kansas Press Association. I was in the newspaper business for about 35 years before I came to KPA and had an opportunity to lead an organization that has a number of outstanding members, and Iola was certainly one of them. I might point out that, and I might miss somebody by doing this, but David and Callie Seaton are sitting here in the front row. They're from Winfield, and David is another example of a family-owned newspaper that served his community well and practiced all the principles of what we call community journalism. It's my honor to be here to recognize a newspaper that's been around 150 years. When I was at Newton, we celebrated our 125th, and I think it was 1997, so they're about to get in on their 150th, but 150 years is an amazing accomplishment. And it's been done almost exclusively by one amazing family. How unusual is this? Well, out of the 200 or so newspapers in Kansas today, 28 of those dailies, that include the Register, only a handful have been owned and operated by the same families for multiple generations. The Register, of course, is one of them. As we celebrate this 150th anniversary, we think about, of those 150 years, almost 130 or more of those were with a member of this family at the helm. Charles Scott, Angelo Scott, Emerson Lynn Jr., and now his daughter Susan Lynn. What is different about family-owned local newspapers? Community. You're going to hear me use that word a lot in the next few minutes, because newspapers that have thrived through the years are the ones whose editors believe their number one priority was building community. Now that doesn't simply mean that we're rah-rah cheerleaders, but it did mean that the community's overall success was paramount. Because if the community was successful, it likely would lead to more prosperity for the city and the county. Then in turn, that would come back to increased prosperity for the newspaper's owners. And often, a community newspaper role meant playing the part of the community's conscience as well. For instance, was your newspaper comforting the afflicted while afflicting the comfortable? Was your newspaper giving voice to those in the community who didn't live on the nicest streets, drive the newest cars, or wear the latest fashions? And were we speaking truth to power, making sure that all citizens were treated fairly? Here's how Charles Scott put it in those early days. We hope to so thoroughly identify the Register with the welfare of this community that its support will be a necessity. We have cast our lot with Iola and Allen County, and it is our purpose first and foremost to labor for their growth and prosperity. Charles was the first publisher from the family. A good community newspaper is one that promotes connectedness. That's a rather awkward word, I know, but it's a way of saying a good newspaper tries to bring people together, to allow all sides of an issue to express themselves, whether through the news columns or in letters to the editor. The newspaper does not always have to have the last word. For a community newspaper to thrive, it's important that readers believe it is their newspaper. And from what I've heard in the first couple of speakers, I think that's how people here felt about the Register. Oh, they may not always agree with it, and up and down the line with every decision of the newspaper editors, but they will feel they, at the very least, can count on the editors to allow them to participate in the process. And that's why the Register has been able to flourish through all these years. I think three major factors define all successful community newspapers, and I think I've heard them a couple of times already, but I'm going to repeat them. The owners have lived here, sent their children to school here, joined their neighbors to serve on the Chamber of Commerce board, and pulled their weight as members of PTA, service clubs, the High School Booster Club, and other organizations working tirelessly for the betterment of the Iola community. If your ownership is in New York City or Dallas, Texas, that's not going to happen quite as often. They were here and they participated. They weren't hobby editors. They were full-time active community members. Second, the owners, in this case the Scotts and the Lynns, have always considered the news of Iola and Allen County their number one priority, allowing no other news source to own that coverage. They would consider it a huge embarrassment to be scooped on a local story by another newspaper or a television station. What's interesting is, just today, Susan was telling me that, was it the Saturday paper? Saturday paper, 20 pages, and not a single wire story because there was so much local news. That's a community newspaper. And third and finally, the newspaper's owners strongly believe in editorial leadership. Communities often face tough decisions. A strong, well-timed nudge from the local newspaper can mean the difference between moving forward and standing still. And if you doubt the family's commitment on the editorial page, I'm going to quote Angelo Scott, who in the late 1950s became the 5th Kansas newspaper man to receive the William Allen White Foundation Award for Journalistic Merit. Longtime Kansas journalist Tom Eblin, who wrote the 140th anniversary of Kansas Press Association, which was not exactly a riveting story, but he wrote stories about all the families including the Seton family, and the Stauffer family, and a number of other families. But he wrote a story about, of course, the Scott and Lynn families. And he quoted from Angelo's 1958 acceptance speech of this award, where Angelo unloaded on his fellow Kansas publishers and editors. And I quote, "In the early days of this state, most men who entered the newspaper business did so for the sole reason that they wanted to speak their piece and have a say about what was going on. They wanted to have a part in guiding the young state through its difficulties to the stars they had all shining in their eyes. They had a sense of mission. And why not? After all, is there any particular point in being an editor?" This is still the quoting. "Is there any particular point in being an editor if you don't write editorials? Is there any good reason why a man should run a newspaper, which is the very embodiment of freedom of information, if he has no opinions to express?" End of quote. And I would add to that, women. The Register is a shining example of what I just said, and I believe that is one reason why it has remained strong throughout its 150 years. Good local coverage, a place for the community to advertise its goods and services, and a strong, focused editorial page. This newspaper is held in such high esteem that Charles Scott, Angelo Scott, and Emerson Lynn Jr. are all members of the Kansas Newspaper Hall of Fame. Community newspapers help residents uncover the facts. We help residents uncover the facts. In today's world, unfortunately, there often is disagreement on what the facts might be. It's the role of the newspaper and its journalists to ferret out the truth so that everyone, okay, almost everyone, can agree on the same set of facts. Will the newspaper in its printed form survive another 50 years or 50 years? No one knows for sure. But what I can tell you and what we do know is this: our nation will still depend on journalism to help, and journalists to help citizens distinguish between facts and opinion and fake news. The leading community newspapers have always believed, as former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis did, that, quote, sunshine is said to be the best of disinfectants. And what we mean by that is if you bring things out in the light, the community is better off for it, that hiding things never is the best way. The Iola Register has for 15 decades now been proving that kind of coverage to its citizens. I join with you all today in celebrating the Register's 150 years of service to the people of Iola and Allen County, and here's hoping for many more. Thank you.
All right, well, as I mentioned, I was able to work with Susan for about 6 years before I came to the college, and really glad that she was my boss for a little while and continues to be my friend. And I know that we're really, really lucky to have the Iola Register here. So I'd like to ask her to make some remarks, and she can talk about whatever she'd like to, because this is her.
Thank you. I can't help but look out and see so many friends who came, and I really appreciate that. Phyllis DeTar worked with us on the book, and she came all the way from Carl Junction, Missouri. And Dave and Callie from Winfield, and hi Tom, and just everybody who came, that Doug came, that Emily Bradbury came from the Kansas Press Association, all the way from Topeka. I really appreciate that. So, and I appreciate this day. And I can't talk to you enough about Bruce and how he and Richard, how we did the book, and Donna. And wow, we did it. And I thought it would be a big relief, and it is, but there's always something to take its place. And how does that happen? I don't know. But I will say that for the Register to be here 150 years is a real testimony to my great-grandfather. And every morning I walk into the office and I see his picture hanging up, and I think, wow, I wonder what he thinks about what the newspaper is like today. And my Uncle Angelo is there, and now you have to be dead to get your picture up on the wall. And now my dad's photo is right by my desk. So it's comforting. It's not a burden, it's a comfort. So, and I know that with my great-grandfather and my dad, and I knew my Uncle Angelo too, because I was a little girl when he was still alive here. And my dad worked with him for several years before my Uncle Angelo took up the fishing rod full-time. But they always felt that it was such a privilege to do this. And my dad, and I thought he was crazy, but he always said, you know, I feel like I should be paying the Register to have the privilege of doing this job. I like it so much. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but but he did, and I hope that I carry the same tradition of being a happy camper when I come into the work, because it's such a privilege to like what you do, and how it gives you such energy and such a sense of purpose. My great-grandfather, I think, set the tone for how we write at the Register. Here's a quote. He says, "When one has been in the habit of talking to a lot of people over the course of several years, he comes, whether justly or not, to think that they have a special interest in him, and he in them. And it's that relationship between the Register staff and our readers that allows us to put personality and individuality into our writing. And you certainly can't get any more personal than our Bob Johnson's weekly columns. He can be writing about his wife Beverly, or he can be, ruminating about slugs, or his dog Angus. But Bob, can you stand up for? Someone who comes to work for 53 years, every day, someone who was there Friday night and called at 11 o'clock to say, "Hey, I think we have a problem on the opinion page for Saturday morning." I mean, that's just spectacular is what it is. And I want to call notice to Mark Hastings, who's been there almost as long as Bob, even though he's 20 years younger. As our ad manager and selling for promoting your businesses around town. My great-grandfather, he also had a real familiar style of writing. One of his editorials starts with, "Thank God it's Christmas." We Americans are a hard-headed, unsentimental race. We have fewer holidays than any other civilized people on earth, and we care less for the few that we have. We can work terribly, but we do not know how to play. We can make money, but we don't know how to enjoy spending it. We like our friends, but say we don't have time to visit them. We love our children, but seldom tell them so. But Christmas is the one holiday that we do keep. It's a day we cease studying how to make money and spend a part of what we have with a free heart. It's one day when we become friends with our children and tell them in 1,000 ways we love them. It's words like these that give me an inkling of what my great-grandfather must have been like. I know he was stern, but perhaps with a soft underbelly. As a staunch prohibitionist, I can spell it. He didn't mince words. In 1890 he wrote, "To the two Missourians who have invaded Iola for the purpose of establishing a whiskey shop, the Register has a few words of advice." The Register has been in Iola for a long time and knows the sentiment of its people better than you do. And it thinks it may save you some disappointment if it tells you what you may expect. If you set up shop in Iola, you may expect the same recognition that a horse thief would get in Missouri. You may expect to be pointed out to strangers as men who have so little decency or morality that you will come where you are not wanted and engage in a damnable traffic for the sake of a few paltry dollars. You may expect that the tears of women and children from whom you have taken bread and clothing will cry out to heaven against you. You may expect to be harassed and annoyed in every legal way. These are some of the things you may expect if you stay. Don't you think you had better go? Politics comes naturally to journalists. My great-grandfather served as both a state senator and in the U.S. Congress. Politicians are also frequent punching bags for journalists. His son, Angelo Scott, wrote, "In private life, most people are men of their word. It is taken for granted that the average citizen will keep his promises, redeem his pledges, do what he says he will do. No one thinks of taking special credit for it. Yet a politician who keeps even a reasonable percentage of the promises he makes in a campaign feels so self-righteously proud of the fact that he will base his entire campaign for re-election on it. Editorial writers also, on occasion, miss the mark. In 1887, my great-grandfather predicted this: when Kansas is as densely populated as New England, it will hold 33 million people, and the day is coming. Well, today the population of Kansas is 2.9 million. He also had his ideas of what Iola should look like when it was developing. It has always been understood that in due course of time there should be a courthouse in the middle of the public square. How would it do then to have a post office on one corner, a city hall on the other, a library on the third, and an opera house on the fourth? With 5 handsome buildings, the public square would not look quite the eyesore that it does now. As publisher of the Register from 1938 to 1966, my Uncle Angelo seemed prescient. In June 1944, with World War II raging, he wrote, "The drafting of single unemployed women between the ages of 20 and 35 was drafted into Congress today, was proposed in Congress. The bill will probably not pass, but I can't help wondering what good, solid argument could be offered against it." Afflicted with a bad heart, he shared the news with readers of his rejection to enlist in the Army. Well, it finally appears that on account of certain heart rumblings and regurgitations and wiggly lines on the electrocardiograph, the U.S. Army will not care to be bothered with the service of Angelo Scott. If my part in this war is to consist of signing rationing certificates instead of shooting bullets, so be it. I was never a good shot anyway. He was a very progressive man, and I think my father was too, and always supporting, well, progress. Angelos wrote, "I don't like to pay taxes better than anybody else. Neither, on the other hand, do I like to live in a dead town that refuses to keep pace with progress and will surely shrink to a country village with neither jobs nor business opportunities if it fails to grasp opportunity when it is at hand. That is, in a nutshell, why I intend to vote for an Iola airport in the election tomorrow." I sometimes I get a little emotional, sorry. My dad was a good teacher. I worked with him for 14 years. So that was special. So, and he told me that a newspaper was only as good as its word. And to tell the truth in an objective manner without ever taking sides. And to have the courage to get to the truth. Well, it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to understand what our society today would be like without a free press. Look at any authoritarian regime and you'll see, or not see, news generated from an arm of the government and their efforts to destroy our freedoms, including the public's right to know of their affairs. The first act of any dictator is to seize control of the channels of information and to turn them into his or her thought control processes. Facebook, sound familiar? It's also important for a newspaper to have a conscience and to be aware of the responsibility we have in publishing the news of our friends and neighbors and how it affects their lives. In my role as publisher, I'm always learning from readers and from my staff as well. Just the other day, reporter Rick Danley shared a vision that the Register should always contain an element of surprise for the readers. They shouldn't know what's coming, he said. I like that. It shows that the Register is geared for tomorrow, whatever it may bring. Thanks.
That's it for our program. I'm sure invite you all to stay around and visit, enjoy the refreshments that we had, and keep supporting our local newspaper. Thanks again for being here.